Welcome back to the Define the Relationship podcast. Today we continue our special 25th anniversary podcast on Seeds Church, a memoir. Today we have a special guest, Ray Lowen, who's been a part of Seeds Church almost since the beginning and is director of Build a Village, which is a nonprofit that had some of its emergence in the community life at Seeds. I hope you enjoy this look back.
We said we wanted to do this project of talking about the story of Seeds and calling it a bit of a memoir because that lets us off the hook on actually being factual.
Wow.
Because your memory is such a, I don't know, we are finding that it's like, did this happen in this year? Or, how did that go? And so much of that feels very fuzzy.
Yeah. I'm not sure any more of the exact sequence. I mean, some of the things I remember exactly, but there's other things that, did that happen in week 3 or was that in week, I'm not sure. But yeah. So the sequence may not be exactly right, but the stories are, for the most part, true.
You remember the year, right? The year it started?
2001.
Yeah.
2001. Yeah. Which is
like early in 2001.
Yeah, it was actually January of 2001.
Right.
Just got home from work. I should back up. So our youngest daughter, Kristen, was leaving with CMU's out-of-town program for Guatemala. And so got home from work on a Saturday afternoon, sitting in the living room with the TV on in the background, reading the newspaper. Kristen and Linda were, doing a bunch of stuff, and all of a sudden the TV station broke into their regular programming to say that an earthquake had, El Salvador and Guatemala had just been hit by an earthquake, and it was pretty devastating. And so because Kristen was going to that country Monday morning,
ding, 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 ding,
yeah, it was like, oh boy, what's going on here? And so I started paying attention to, really paying attention to what's happening here.
Yeah.
I'm probably sad to admit that if Kristen had not been going there in 2 days, I probably would have listened to it like you do to so many other news stories, and that would have been just another story, right? But because she was going there, we really started paying attention. Weren't sure whether her group was actually going to go on Monday morning, but they ended up going as planned. And the first 2 weeks that they were going to be in Guatemala, they were going to be in a remote area with no outside communication. So she was going to leave Monday. We knew for sure we would not hear from her for the first 2 weeks, for sure. And so in the meantime, news stories kept coming out of, both Guatemala and El Salvador saying that, aftershocks were continuing. There had been a whole bunch of devastation. I mean, it turned out that El Salvador was struck more severely than Guatemala. So, I think 100,000 homes were destroyed, over 1,000 people lost their lives, 25,000 people were injured, and just on and on and on. The story was pretty devastating. So in the meantime, in the 2 weeks that we were waiting to hear from Kristen as to how things were going, I heard an interview with Ken Reddick, who was the director of MCC at that time, MCC Manitoba. Heard an interview with him on the radio station where he talked about, MCC was going to get involved in helping to build some homes in El Salvador. And then on the Sunday, I think it was the next Sunday morning, you mentioned in church that it'd be a really good idea, maybe as a congregation, if we got together and tried to build one home for people in El Salvador. And so, those things were sort of percolating around in my mind. And then I got an email from Kristen, 2 weeks in. And, the email was going to change me, obviously. So it's still a little emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she just, the email said, Dad, we're in this little remote village. We stayed with this family, and the people here are just, I've never experienced this kind of generosity in my life. I mean, the people here were willing to give us their beds, their food, and I'm not talking about their extra food, but all of their food. And she said, it's just like the generosity has just blown me away. And that got me to thinking that, if somebody who had almost nothing in the way of material goods was willing to share everything with our daughter, maybe we should be more willing to share something with people who had been through the earthquake. And, maybe I could encourage others to do the same thing. And then one night, a bunch of us got around our kitchen table. I don't remember exactly who was all there, but
I remember that.
Yeah, there was a bunch of
Yeah.
people who got together, and we started talking about, maybe we could build a home. Maybe we could raise enough money to build a home in El Salvador. And then, the discussion continued on, and then somebody said, well, maybe we could. So MCC had asked us to put together a business plan. So, I talked to Ken Redding in the meantime, and said we were interested in, helping raise some money. And he said, well, put together this business plan. So we did that. After this conversation that we had around the table, and the number that we came up with was we tried to raise enough money to build 15 homes, which would, homes were about $3,000 a piece. So
Right.
we're going to try to raise $45,000.
Yeah.
And then I forget exactly who, but somebody said, well, maybe we can raise enough money to build a small village. And that's how the Build a Village, name sort of came into being.
I do remember, I very much remember sitting around your kitchen table. I also don't remember who was all around the table, but it's a distinct kind of conversation in my head, partially because of that, just that switch from like, well, maybe we could build one home to like, maybe we could help build a village. And then that was just like, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a big goal.
Yeah, and I mean, at that time, we thought 15 was a real stretch goal. Well, in the end, we built 400 homes, raised about $1 million through Build a Village, through the many people who were involved with Build a Village, and ended up sending 10 teams of people to go to El Salvador to build relationships and also help people build homes. So, I mean, it went from, I've often chuckled about, how we had this great business plan, which was, going from 1 to 15, and God said, well, no, there's more.
Yeah, we thought 15 was mind-blowing, and then
Yes,
the end result was so much more mind-blowing, and then eventually became much more than about partnering with, we partnered with people in El Salvador, with MCC, but then also began to partner in terms of receiving refugees to Canada.
Yeah.
Do you remember at all how that conversation started? How I remember the two kind of streams that we talked about a fair bit in Build a Village in terms of like our work across the globe and our work at home locally, right? Yeah.
So again, interestingly enough, the spark sort of for the sponsoring of refugee families came from another radio interview that Louise Giesbrecht from Winnipeg did.
Right.
And she actually spoke to a group in Morris about the fact that, most refugees that were coming to Canada at that time, this was around 2005, most of the refugees that were coming to Canada, in fact, I'm going to say almost all, were going to major centers. So they were coming to Canada and they were going to Toronto and Montreal and Vancouver and Winnipeg, but almost none were coming to rural areas of Canada. And so she was one of the first people that started advocating for the fact that, rural communities should be able to accept refugees as well. And because many of the people coming as refugees were from rural parts of their country. Mm-hmm. And so, somebody who had been farming in the Congo or in Sudan didn't necessarily want to be in downtown Vancouver or downtown Winnipeg or wherever. Not that there's anything wrong with those places, but it's just, people wanted to be in smaller communities as well. And so then through some of those discussions, like you say about, we were looking at the global outreach, and then we started saying, well, okay, we're doing this. It's great to build relationships with people in El Salvador, and we had also done some work in the Middle East, going to Jordan to build some homes together with MCC and Habitat for Humanity. So great to be building those kind of bridges, but what kind of bridges could we be building right at home? Mm-hmm. And, could we be doing something here to help people who were struggling in other parts of the world? And so that led us into eventually sponsoring refugee families together with MCC. And there too, we started with one family. We started with Dudu and her family. We didn't actually financially sponsor them, but they wanted to be in a smaller community, so we took over their support, basically, not financially, but otherwise. Mm-hmm. And that has led to, Build a Village sponsoring 50-some families, probably 300 people roughly, who have had a chance to start a new life in Canada as a result of people who were willing to contribute both time and financial resources to their sponsorship.
So I was kind of something that connected for me when I've heard you tell the story about Kristen going to Guatemala and how that impacted you. Probably heard it countless times. Yep. But what connected for me this time was just looking back from where we are today, building 400 homes in El Salvador, and then 50 plus families being supported as refugees to come to our area. One of the things that I think was a byproduct of that was we had this effect where now things that were happening in the world were suddenly having a personal connection to us.
Absolutely.
So, right now, for example, the situation in Sudan has not been very good for many years now. No. It's a failed society. And we view what's happening there, and it isn't something that's on the front pages of our news right now. Like there's many other things going on, obviously, war in Ukraine and other things. But because we have received people from Sudan as refugees, and we have friendships with people who still have family back there, we hear these things, and they hit us differently because these aren't just random geographic places, which there are hundreds and hundreds of in the world, but that
you're
we now have connection
right.
to people, and we've had that with Syria and Turkey and of course El Salvador and anything in the Central America, Congo, Venezuela. It's really shifted, I think, people's just their perspective on the world and what's happening. And it kind of has felt like this whole time that we've been connected with through Build a Village stuff that, people have ended up getting skin in the game in a way that we could have sort of just ignored it, oh, that's terrible. Move on, move on with your life. And in your one little story there where you said I don't think I can really move on because I've got skin in the game with your daughter being part of something. And then it suddenly ends up becoming, much bigger than that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When we think of Sudan now, we think about Ebtisam's family and how are they doing. Mm-hmm. We think about Saleh's family that's still there and what's happening to them. And, in Syria, we've got all kinds of connections to people here who still have family there and in many other places too. And so these are not just news stories anymore. They're news stories that have a very personal connection to people right here. in our small little community. And you talk to Amal about her family in Gaza, and just on and on and on. There's just so we have probably in southern Manitoba we are connected to every trouble spot in the world, and that connection now is a personal connection. So that it's just different than watching it on TV or hearing it on the radio or whatever.
Yeah.
I have like I have two different streams of questions going on in my mind. I don't know.
Start somewhere.
Okay. One is, as you're talking, what made you think that you could do something about that? That's one part. That maybe I'll take this in two parts. Because this is a bit of a seed story, I want Build a Village is not a seeds organization. It was a conversation that started within a context of a local congregation, but it's something that is much bigger. It's evolved
totally
to being something that's much bigger than one location, one community, which is, I think, a beautiful thing. When you look back, what matters to you about, like, when you think about it starting somewhere, like, how significant is that to you? Like, when you think about it, I don't know if that makes sense to you.
It is significant as to how it started, where it started, because at any point in time with something like this, we all need people to encourage us, people to get on board, and on and on and on. And if that hadn't been there, this Build a Village is not about me. I didn't do it. It's about many, many people who made this happen financially, through, working as volunteers, supporting families, and on and on and on. So, if that sort of appetite or whatever hadn't been there, it may have just not ever amounted to anything. So, I think it's important that where it started, how it started, the people that were involved early on, sort of got it off the ground, gave it that momentum, and if that had not been there, it may not have ever amounted to anything.
It reminds me of how important a person is and how important a community is. Like, without there was something in either your personality, your makeup, your history, your dadness, like whatever, there's something about you and your particular situation that allowed this to rise up and not just be something that you thought about in yourself, but something that you actually started to vocalize to us first, right. I think, and then it caught. And so then it needed to be, so it caught with a smaller group of people, and then it started to catch with a larger group of people, and then it kind of keeps spreading. And I think for myself, the email from Kristen was very much a part of my driving force, realizing that, hey, there's somebody in another part of the world that had almost nothing. They were willing to share everything with our daughter. How can we not, we've got, look around the community, we've got so many more resources here as far as material things. How could we not share with somebody that was in need? But it could have also been like, oh, our daughter is somewhere, we want her to be safe, so we'll care about this because our daughter's there. And then a year after, when Kristen comes home, you could have said, well, now our daughter's back, and so, like, we did a little something there. But that's not how, like, it was the spark for something, but it wasn't contained to, do you know what I mean? Like it being about.
So early on, talking about people who did this, I mean, I think early on, we came to the realization that this was, God was doing this. And we were just trying to run as fast as we could to catch up with what he was doing. Many of the stories, so many of the stories that I think about from the early days of Build a Village were such God things. They weren't anything that I did or you guys did or anybody did. I mean, it was just, it was, I can't explain it other than, saying either it was a real coincidence, which is a little inside joke between Dar and myself, because I think I started off initially saying, oh, what a great coincidence. And then I think it was Dar that said, well, maybe this is not a coincidence. Maybe it's something else. Examples of that, silly little things like one Saturday, just finishing up at work. And so Gordon Sinclair was a well-known Winnipeg Free Press columnist. And so we had been thinking about different ways to spread the message and, broaden the scope of Build a Village and on and on. So it wasn't just an Altona thing. It was, And so at the end of my workday on Saturday, just ready to go home, and I had this feeling that I should write an email to Gordon Sinclair telling him the story. And I thought about it. I said, it's silly. Like, why would you do that? I mean, Gordon Sinclair doesn't care about your little Build a Village story, And so, but I really, really felt this overwhelming sense, like, you've got to do this. And so I sat back down at my computer, and I sent him an email with the Build a Village story to that point. Story about Kristen in El Salvador and, on and on and on. Hit send, didn't think about it again on Sunday. Monday morning, first thing, I think it was like 7 o'clock in the morning, I get this phone call from somebody saying, hey, have you seen the Free Press? And I said, no. Well, he said, there's a story in the Free Press about Build a Village. I said, what? And he said, yeah, pick it up and read Gordon Sinclair's story or his column. And so I went to the store and picked up a Free Press, and Gordon Sinclair, without talking to me,
from the email,
without doing any background checks, anything, he started off his column saying, I was sitting there Saturday night trying to decide, what am I going to write for my Monday column? And then I got this email. And I decided that I would just print the email verbatim, and that's what he did. So his column that day was this little 1 or 2 paragraph introduction with the email.
You helped him out.
So basically, he had writer's block, and you just handed it on a platter.
What a coincidence!
Yeah, what a coincidence, exactly. And I've thought about that later. I think, anybody who's ever been interviewed, or done anything with the media, knows that they do, they will do like background checks, verifying this, verifying that, at least reach out to the person to find out if this person is real or whatever. None of that happened. So here is this story, and that started bringing in calls and emails from all over Manitoba saying, hey, read this story, we'd like to get involved in helping build a home in El Salvador. That was just one of the things. There were so many other things. A doctor couple from, so I should back up a little bit. So one day I decided, we really should try to involve more communities. So I'm going to, I had identified 3 people that I knew very well in Winkler. And I took a day off work and I went to see them. To tell them the Build a Village story and see if we could get them involved in the Build a Village movement. And I'll never forget, I came home that day so disappointed because in all 3 cases, probably 3 minutes into telling the Build a Village story, their eyes glazed over, and it was just like, I could tell there was just no interest there at all. Like none of the three people that I had sort of identified as being people who could sort of carry that in Winkler for us were actually interested. They just weren't interested at all. And so I was incredibly disappointed. And then,
just saying a lot. I just want to pause for a moment because you didn't get disappointed or down very easily. I seem to remember that you were always super optimistic, and I was the downer in our relationship. And you would always be like,
and you're also a very good vision caster. I mean, like you're top 10% of vision casting, I think, of people. So, I mean, it wasn't that you just like laid some real eggs. I think you probably...
So maybe now you can say you were disappointed. But if I have an inkling that if I would have talked to you on that day, and maybe I did, you wouldn't have told me that you were disappointed.
I might not have told you, but I was. Because I remember coming home and telling Linda how... Like, yeah, I mean, I thought these people were going to be interested, and they just weren't. And then again, by coincidence, thank you, Jesus. A couple of days later, I got a call from a doctor couple in Winkler saying, we heard about Build a Village on the radio, heard one of the news stories.
A doctor couple? There's like doctor couples?
No.
Okay, a doctor
and a spouse.
Okay.
Yes, okay. Yes.
Nitpicking.
And so they said, we've got this idea to, we'd like to help. And we've got this idea, we're going to host a dessert night in our backyard Sunday evening. Could you come and say a few words about Build a Village, blah, 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 blah. And so I thought to myself, a dessert night. In your backyard, is that going to raise any money at all? Like I was a little skeptical, but hey, yeah, they wanted to do it, and so I went down Sunday night, and they had a backyard full of friends who listened to the story about Build a Village, and then the next day they called and said, "Hey, we've got some money for you if you want to come pick it up," and so I went to pick it up, and people had enjoyed a piece of cake or a piece of pie and a coffee, whatever, and had written checks or given cash or whatever. And the evening raised $12,000, like enough to build 4 homes.
Wow.
And it was like, yeah, okay, exactly. Wow. It was like, I would never have expected that.
Nice little dessert night.
Nice little dessert night. You bet. You bet. And then around the same time, got a call from somebody else saying, got this idea for fundraising in Winkler. We'd like to, we should put on a Low German comedy night. And again, my first thought was, that doesn't sound like a big fundraiser to me, but whatever. So initially, I sort of just didn't respond, put it out of my mind kind of thing. And then about a week later, this gentleman called me again and said, no, I'm serious. We need to put on this Low German comedy night in Winkler. And said, okay, fine.
It'll draw millions.
Yes. And so we arranged to rent one of the elementary school auditoriums, and this comedy group had done a couple of performances somewhere else. So they were all set to go. And so we forget how, I think the gymnasium held 400 people. So we printed up 400 tickets. We were going to give away tickets free of charge and then take a collection because that seems to be the way to raise the most money rather than selling tickets. And so, 3 days before the comedy night, we had given away, 100 tickets. I mean, it was like, this is not going anywhere. Well, the Saturday morning, it was happening on the Saturday night, the Saturday morning, got a call from the person in Winkler that was in charge of the ticket distribution and said, tickets are all gone. And I'm getting more phone calls and more phone calls and more phone calls. My phone was ringing, other people's phones. So we went to
enough Low German
Sorry?
comedy. People just can't get enough.
No,
of
exactly.
Low German comedy.
So we went down, set up more chairs in the school. Filled up the gymnasium out into the lobby area. I think we finally ended up with about 500 chairs. And there were still people, even after we had given away all those tickets, there were still more people wanting to come, and we just didn't have any more room for people, so we had to stop. But so this Low German comedy group did their thing. They were hilarious. I mean, it was a fantastic evening. Took the collection, and again, I would have thought maybe if we raised a couple of grand, we're doing good. Mm-hmm. $20,000, $20,000.
Wow.
Again, enough for almost 7 homes.
Yeah.
It was not unusual. I mean, big events and also on a daily basis. I recall it was not unusual for people to drop in at your office and provide money. And I also very clearly remember you potentially chastising me or encouraging me, or however you want to put it.
Must have been encouraging.
Must have been encouraging. That the money was always, you were quite confident it was going to be there. It was the people. It was like, you were like, money's not going to be a problem. Money's going to be there.
Right. And interestingly enough, in our now 23 years of Build a Village, whether it's raising the money for El Salvador, sponsoring families, whatever we have needed, finances, homes for people to live in, on and on and on, whatever we've needed has always been there. That's just mind-blowing when you think about it, because you can talk to almost any nonprofit organization, and they struggle with something. They struggle with funds. They struggle with, whatever. They struggle with something. And, I know when I've been involved with other groups who are sponsoring, I mean, they can't believe that we have not had financial issues, that we haven't, that the money's always been there. But it has been. It's always been there. Mm-hmm. And, as well as I do, that when people have come, I mean, sometimes, it's been a day or two before we're going to pick them up at the airport, and we still don't have a house, or we don't have an apartment or whatever. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, there's three offers of, I've got an apartment. Oh, I've got an apartment, or I've got a house. And now we've gone from not having a place for them to having a choice of 3 different places for them. Again, it's just mind-boggling how that's happened, and I know it's not a coincidence.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I have a kind of an observation that I think, just thinking about it from the seeds perspective, just in terms of, I feel like what happened with Build a Village sort of did a bit of a number on our kind of what we thought our capacity was as people and as an organization. It felt like we sort of started with being what we thought were stretch goals, like saying, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we built a house for somebody, or if we built 10 houses? And then we had this experience of it sort of multiplying to 10 times that in a heartbeat. And it, I'm thinking kind of a bit about, it wasn't so much about how much we could do, but sort of us not being afraid to say that seems like that could be a lot of work to do that, but I think we can say yes to it. So I think about, maybe you want to say a little bit of the first time MCC came to us was saying, we have 4 families coming from Sudan, but you need to make the decision for some reason in 48 hours or something like that. Do you remember that one? I remember us having a Build a Village steering team meeting at one point, and we had an offer from MCC, and they needed to know very quickly. I don't know if you remember that story, but I think that was connected to the to having the 4 families that ended up coming from Sudan. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that story. I do remember the story, though, about when they wanted us to sponsor somebody that had medical needs.
That's what I was,
Right.
that's
Okay,
what I
yeah,
was thinking.
yeah.
And I wondered if that one was also, that was pretty time sensitive, I think, right?
It was time sensitive, but what I'll never forget about that is so MCC, sent us the request saying like, hey, we're looking for sponsorship for, X. But there's some issues related to that. It won't be easy and whatever. And so we had a meeting and said, okay, we're in, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
And then Brian Dick, who was the coordinator at that time, got back to us and said,
Are you sure?
are you sure?
Yeah.
Yes. And so they did something that had never been done before. And they said, we're going to provide you with the medical records around this sponsorship, so you can, make a more informed decision. And so we took a look at all of the medical records, and there were, it was a bit of an onerous kind of an undertaking. And so I remember we met again. We talked about it, we prayed about it, and we again decided that we want to do this. We're going to do this, and so we again sent Brian the email saying we're going to do it, and then he came back for the third time and said, I don't know if you really understand what you're committing to.
Do you
but
understand the risk
yeah,
that you're
yeah.
taking?
Here's the and so he went through everything again. Here's the risks. Here's all the things that are going to need to happen, and on and on and on. And we again said yes. I mean, our
Bias, or
I mean our not our goal, but our focus was to try to help the least of these, right?
Yeah.
And so when we looked at this situation, we thought, well, if this case doesn't sort of personify that, then whatever will. And no, this is what we're called to do. I mean, it's going to be tough, and yes, it's sure. I mean, there's all kinds of, but it's what we want to do. And so we did that, and so I mean, there's been been those kind of cases where others, I mean, in this particular case, another country had already at one point accepted this case, and then when they saw the information, said, "Oh no, we can't.
We're out.
We're out." Yeah. Canada Immigration had been across the country looking for sponsors and was not finding anybody, and finally went to MCC and said, "Look, can you try to help us find a spot for this particular case?" And so,
Brian came to us, but Brian wasn't going to let us say yes too easily.
Well, no. I mean,
he really
wanted us to make sure that we knew
Yeah.
what it was that we were getting into.
Yeah.
So,
I think one of the things that Build a Village did for me, and I think for our leadership also at Seeds, was to kind of lean into those experiences of non-rationality. Like, this doesn't make sense on paper to say yes to this. It's not within the scope of what we say. Oh yeah, we've got it all lined up. We've got everything prepared. We've got the money. We've got all the resources. Often Build a Village responded with a deep sense of trust and faith, I think, because there was something that, I don't quite know how we're going to do this, and maybe there was a bit more fear and trembling on my part. You had all the optimism and faith in the world. I have less.
we've all had fear and trembling. I mean, when you've got a family of 13 people, as an example, they're going to be here in 2 weeks, and there are almost no places in Altona that are suitable, that are large enough for a family of that many people. I mean, there is some fear and trembling because these people have their airplane tickets. They're coming. Where are we going to put them?
Yeah.
But fortunately, I mean, it's been an incredible blessing that God has always provided for where we're going to put people, or what they're going to do when they get here. And I mean, one of the things that we all know is that almost nothing, when it comes to sponsorships or immigration, almost nothing goes as planned. I mean, things happen last minute, and things change, and I mean, we've so many examples of how that has happened. But somehow, at the end, when the family is here, settled into their place, you sit down and say, okay, like that's the 7th time in a row that we've experienced this and this and this. When are we ever going to give up on the fear and the trembling and just say, you know what, this is going to work? But every time there is a bit of that fear and trembling, because it's like, okay, what if it doesn't work this time? What if there isn't a place this time? What if the money isn't there? What if the volunteers aren't there? What if? Yeah. But it always has been. It always has been.
I wanted to talk about kind of the relational kind of aspect of Build a Village and how significant that was, especially in the early years with building. You said you sent 10 teams to El Salvador, but one thing that happened that was quite unique is someone on our team had the vision, maybe it was you, that we really needed to have a team of El Salvadorians come here and do a work project and connect with us. And talk a little bit about the significance of that, because we developed some significant relationships going there, but then for them to come here was interesting.
Well, I think as in almost anything, or maybe as in everything, it is all about relationships, right? I mean, people in El Salvador didn't need our expertise to come and build homes for them.
Right.
It wasn't about building homes. It never was about, I shouldn't say that. The important thing wasn't the building of the homes. In
fact, sometimes our expertise could get in the way.
It could get in the way. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of times it was we were just better to be quiet and just do what they asked us to do and not try to, give our North American expertise or our way of doing it, because I remember the case in Jordan. Yeah. So we're in Jordan building homes which were built out of concrete. And so I've got this idea that, if we could, how much would a cement mixer cost? Let's be honest, you were tired of mixing that damn cement by hand. I was often on the team because I was the least qualified to do anything else. I was the cement mixer. So I would stand there all day mixing cement in a hole in the ground, with sand, water, cement, and you would just mix and mix and mix. And I had this this grand idea that, if we bought a cement mixer, you could build like 10 times the homes that you're building right now. And so I suggested to the people there, the people at Habitat, I said, how much would a cement mixer cost? It would be about $3,000. I said, okay, we're going to buy you a cement mixer so that you can build more.
We have a great idea.
We have a great idea. And I'll never forget, they said, maybe. And, so then I let it sit for a day or two, and then I broached the subject again, saying, like, hey, how about the cement mixer idea? Like, what do you guys think about that? And again, it was like, maybe. And so by that time I thought, okay, there's something going on here. So on the Friday, when we were going to do the big pour, pouring the roof was the big pour. Yeah. And so it involved the whole community. Yeah. Everybody. There was like probably 50, 60, maybe 100 people there. I don't know. Yeah. I don't remember how many people. But again, that morning I said to the guys, this cement mixer thing, like, we really need to do this. And one of the guys said, take a look around you. I did. I looked and I saw the whole community was there, mixing cement, carrying cement up in guffas up to the top of the roof. Another group of people was on the roof spreading it and whatever. And he said, if we had a cement mixer, none of this community stuff would happen. And it was like, Oh, yeah. This is not about building as many homes as we can, although that's good too. But this is about building a home, but also at the same time building relationships, building communities, building whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of times we had these grandiose North American ideas as to, let's get this moving. But it wasn't about that. It was about building relationships. And that was one of the things that we learned in El Salvador as well, is that, they could have built the homes without us. The relationships, the bonds that the bridges that we were able to build between Canada and El Salvador needed those personal visits, in order to happen. So yeah, it is about relationship building. And I think when I look at it, it wasn't only about, in fact, it was maybe not even so much about building relationships between Canada and El Salvador as it was building relationships between people on the teams that went from here. Building relationships between the various churches. We had people from all kinds of different denominations that were part of the teams. And we came to the realization that, we could work on these kind of things together. So it was building relationships here, building relationships with people on the teams, building relationships with people there, building a closer relationship with God in a lot of cases. Yeah. So, there was just a lot of relationship building that happened,
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true.
How has being a part of and leading Build a Village shaped your life?
Oh, it's been incredible. I've learned so much from people in other parts of the world. Like Ted talked about before, just the worldview is totally different today than it was 20 some years ago. Not that I was just thinking about Altona and Manitoba at that time either, but now it's like, we've got contacts and friends and people we know in all parts of the world, and so my worldview has certainly changed. But so many things that we've learned from this experience that, I'm going to say that people who have been involved with Build a Village on teams or, in sponsoring families, supporting families, I'm going to say that we have been blessed more than we have been a blessing in many cases. One example from El Salvador, we're in this little church. They have a Wednesday night church service, and so we're in this little prayer service. And so they start by really unique, you guys should probably try this, unique way of preaching is they will read they read a couple of Bible verses, and then they went around the room and said, "So, Darlene, how do these Bible verses impact you? How have they impacted you?" And on and on and on. And when that was done, we all knelt on the floor and had this prayer session, and everybody was praying audibly, sitting there with my eyes closed and praying, and I hear like the wording getting, like, people are getting louder and louder and louder, and I look around the room and I see Davey is sitting on one side. He was an El Salvadorian who the army tried to kill. Thought they had killed him. Actually, they slashed his throat, threw him on a pile of bodies, and left him for dead. His family came along a day or so after to claim his body, give him a proper burial, and found he was still breathing. And so they somehow got him to a doctor, and in the end he survived. So looking at other people in the room, people had been involved in other parts of the Civil War. People had just lost their homes in the earthquake. People were living with almost nothing when it came to material goods. And here's a small group of El Salvadorians, and as they prayed, it kept getting louder and louder, and they were saying, "Thank you, Jesus, thank you." And I looked around and I thought, boy, I mean, if these people going through, Davey, having lived through what he's lived through, all these other people who've lost homes, who've had so much trouble in their lives, over a long period of time. I mean, they're on their knees saying, "Thank you, Jesus, thank you." Boy, how often should we be falling to our knees and just saying thank you, thank you. And so it's been those kind of experiences that have impacted me in incredible ways.
Yeah.
And the other thing, like we've already talked about, I mean, the whole God thing, I mean, all the God things that sort of happened day after day after day, week after week, month after month. It's just had an incredible impact.